Yeah, the idea of multiple intelligences is the critique of the widely accepted notion that we have a single intelligence, meaning that if we're good in one thing, we're good in everything. If we're average in one thing, we're average in everything. If we are below average, we're below average in everything. In contrast, my view of multiple intelligence is that we have a number of rather different faculties or capacities, and you can be excellent in one, average in another, poor in a third. And if I know somebody is good in drawing, I cannot predict if they're going to be good with language, good with music, and so on. And when you come to a museum like this, obviously these young children or these adolescents are excellent in depiction, both realistic depiction and more imaginative kind of depiction. But we have no way of knowing whether Picasso was a good student in school. In fact, Picasso was not a good student. There are other people who might have been very good students. So yes, the museum says a particular talent with graphic representation is not a predictor of other kinds of capacities. If, however, you have a view of multiple intelligences, you don't spend a lot of time focusing on a particular test score. You see which child sits under the table and draws the legs of the ant for 3 hours a day, and then puts it on the wall, and then draws a picture of a dragon and makes a comparison. Your eye is much more open to what the child actually does, particularly when the child is motivated on his own, and not when there's somebody sitting in front of him saying, you won't get to eat if you don't practice for 3 more hours a day. First of all, within psychology, the theory of multiple intelligences is not particularly well received because there is so much of a vested interest in the IQ test and the single summary statistic. Outside of psychology, it's not nearly as controversial. Educators assume I'm correct. Biologists also are very sympathetic because they know that the human mind and brain is very complicated, and there's no reason to think that one area of strength predicts another area. Professor Winner spoke about another area of controversy, namely, is there such a thing as talent? Because many people think it's just hard work, and if anybody were to practice drawing a lot, they could draw when they were 12 years old, as well as Paul Klee or as well as Pablo Picasso. I think the answer is technically they could probably be as good representationally if they did nothing but work on that. But artist is more than simply, are you technically graphically? It's have you got imagination? Can you put things back in unusual ways? I was just reading where Picasso would sit under the table so he could see the legs of women, his aunts, and just draw them. This is not what the average child would do. And what's exciting about this museum, well, there are two things. One, literally 30 years ago, in the late 1970s, I wrote a book called Artful Scribbles, where I compared the juvenilia of famous artists, like we have here, with the juvenilia of ordinary children. If this museum were here, it would have saved me a lot of trouble, because I had to go and find the young Klee, the young Picasso, young Toulouse-Lautrec, and so on. Here, it's all together. But I think what's most special about this museum is it makes you think. It makes you think of what is the relationship between what a 7 or 8-year-old Lovis Corinth or Otto Dix does and what those artists do when they are 20, 40, 50. Kirchner was already drawing as a youth the same kinds of themes that he drew when he was much older. Also, it raises very sharply the question of what is the difference between somebody who is well-trained as opposed to have somebody who has a gift. And I was looking there at 2 horses. I think one horse was by Franz Marc and the other horse was by a classmate. And in a superficial level, they both look kind of like a horse. But if you look carefully, I think anybody with the eyes of an artist would say there's something in the Marc which you would not have gotten in the classmate of student. And that's, to me, what all good museums do, is they make you think about things that you wouldn't think about ordinarily. My own teacher said, it's not even important whether you think the Franz Marc at 12 is better than the 12-year-old student. What's important is, do you see the difference? And this museum makes you look at the difference between the young artist and the adult artist, between the young artist and another person who might be quite good, but nobody will ever pay attention to what they do when they're an adult.